Hey, this is Art from My New Microphone, and in today's video, I would like to discuss a super simple yet effective way to switch up our monitoring and get a sort of different look at the mix throughout the mixing process, even if we don't have multiple pairs of monitors, multiple sets of speakers, or multiple sets of headphones. And without burying the lead, that simple process is turning the monitoring volume up and down throughout the mix. Now, before you click off thinking, oh, this is too simple, I want to discuss why in this video. You may know that the audible human range of hearing spans from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. However, it is not the case that we hear all frequencies within this range equally. We are naturally most sensitive to the mid-range frequencies, particularly around the 4K range, and much less sensitive to the low end and the high end. On top of that, as we age and we damage our hearing, that very highest frequency we can hear drops over time. For example, I'm 29 years old at the time of this recording, and after going to a lot of really loud shows and having a lot of loud rehearsals and jam sessions, I can really only hear up to about 16,500 Hz. Although I now know that I should be taking much better care of my hearing, I do expect this number to drop as I age. But here's the kicker and what is important for our discussion today. The natural frequency response of our hearing actually changes as we are exposed to varying sound pressure levels. Our ear's frequency response actually starts to flatten out as we increase the listening levels. What this means is that the balance of frequencies of the mix will actually change as we alter the monitoring levels without touching the balance of the mix itself whatsoever. Let's hop into a screen share quickly, and I will show you a few graphs that represent this phenomenon. All right, so here we are inside my website, mynewmicrophone.com. I will leave a link in the description box down below to this specific article. And what we have here is a graph showing the equal loudness contours in red. This was published in 1955, and the Fletcher-Munson curves shown in blue, published in 1933. The source is from commonswikipedia.org. And inside the graph, we have the frequencies along the x-axis. So we can see here that we start at 20 Hertz, and right here is about 20,000 Hertz. And on the y-axis, we have sound pressure level measured in decibels sound pressure level. These lines are represented by Phon, which is a measurement of perceived loudness. Now, first off, you may have noticed down here at the threshold of human hearing that at the most sensitive frequencies, we actually drop down below 0 dB SPL. Now, dB SPL is not an absolute value, so we can actually drop down below 0. What this refers to is a logarithmic ratio where the point of reference is actually 0.0002 Pascal. So if we happen to have negative dB SPL, it simply means that we are below this reference value right here. So back to the graphs here, we see a lot of similarities between the equal loudness contours and the Fletcher-Munson curves. And for example, if we go down here to the threshold of human hearing, we see that we need a lot more energy to hear low-end frequencies than we do in the more sensitive mid-range area here. And then we would also need more energy in the very high end to hear these frequencies compared to, again, these mid-range frequencies. You can see here, this line is about 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. So in this range, we are the most sensitive to frequencies pretty much across the board, independent of how loud the source material is. However, we see here that above the threshold, as we begin increasing the perceived loudness in Phon, these lines start to flatten out. So for example, if we look at the Fletcher-Munson curves at 100 Phon, we see that this line is very much more flat than it is at the threshold. So what this means is that at louder levels, our ears will have a better response to the low end energy down here. We'll still be a bit more sensitive to the upper mid-range frequencies here between, say, 2,000 to 6,000. And then we'll need a little bit more energy to hear these high-end frequencies. These dotted black lines up here, again, as we sustain hearing damage and age, these will look vastly different. And so to recap, as we turn down our monitoring levels, our ears will be much more focused on the mid-range, as we won't be able to hear the low end or the high end nearly as clearly. And as we increase the monitoring level, we will actually flatten out our hearing frequency response, and we will hear more low end relative to the mid-range, although we will be slightly less sensitive to the high frequencies nonetheless. So the way our ears naturally hear different monitoring levels can be both a good thing or a bad thing in the mix. On the not so good side, it's yet another psychoacoustic mind game that we must deal with within the mix. Other examples include ear fatigue, as we are monitoring the mix for too long at perhaps too high a level, and our ear's propensity to quickly adjust to whatever it is we are listening to, which causes us to quickly lose objectivity in the mix. Effectively changing the frequency balance of the mix by altering the monitoring levels is yet another way that any sense of consistent perception can be challenged. However, on the bright side, by monitoring at different volumes, we can effectively get a sense of how our mix will translate to smaller or bigger systems without necessarily having to invest in different sets of studio monitors, studio headphones, or other speakers. But before we get to the benefits, I must mention safety first, because monitoring at too high a level will cause permanent hearing damage. And the louder we monitor, the less time we have before sustaining such damage. Let's hop back into a screen share quickly and consider what the National Institute of Health and Safety and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration have to say about safe exposure limits to sound pressure level. All right, so here we are again in the same article I referenced earlier in the video. Again, there's a link in the description box down below for you to check it out for yourself. And we are going to look at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and what they have to say about recommended exposure limits to sound. Now, before we look at this table right here, we need to be aware of the assumptions that were made in these tests. So both standards make the following assumptions. Noise levels occur as part of a work environment. The work environment is limited to 8-hour days, 5 days per week over a 40-year working lifetime, and time away from work is quiet. So extending this to monitoring our mixes, if we were to work 8 hours a day mixing, 5 days per week over a 40-year working lifetime, then these would be perhaps more accurate than if we worked less or more. We should also be aware that any loud environments outside of our mixing endeavors can cause hearing damage as well. So be careful when going out to shows and always wear proper earplugs or other hearing protection. All right, so we can now scroll up to this chart and we can see here that the NIOSH is quite a bit more conservative than the OSHA standard. And so I would always err on the side of caution, and so we will focus on the National Institute of Safety and Health measurements just for this. But I also included the OSHA standards so that you could have a look at these as well. So if we look at a safe listening time of 8 hours, we see here that we can listen to 85 dBA, which roughly translates to 85 dB SPL. dBA is a dB SPL measurement that takes into account perceived loudness. We can reference back to the Fletcher-Munson curves or equal loudness contours for a good reference on that. But in general, we can translate directly over to dB SPL here. What this tells us is that if we're mixing for 8 hours a day, then 85 dB SPL and lower will be safe listening or monitoring volumes. Anything below 85 dB SPL will be safe throughout most of the day. And we can see here that as we increase our monitoring levels by 3 dB, we effectively have the time that we have to safely monitor at such a level. Moving up and up, we see that at 97 dB SPL, we have 30 minutes of safe monitoring before sustaining hearing damage. At 100 dB SPL, we have 15 minutes, and moving up, we can get into very short listening times before sustaining damage. I wouldn't recommend monitoring at any of these volumes right here. However, if we need to get a sense of how our mix will translate to really loud systems, we can increase the monitoring level this high for very short periods of time just to get a sense of how our mix may translate to bigger systems. So I just really wanted to get this safety information out of the way first. All right, so what we've gathered thus far in the video is that an 80 to about 85 dB SPL monitoring volume is sort of the sweet spot where we have a low risk of sustaining hearing damage, and yet our hearing frequency response is the most balanced and flat. At lower monitoring levels, our ears naturally tend to focus more on the mid-range frequencies as we are more sensitive to these frequencies, and getting a great mix right in the mid-range will help tremendously in mix translatability through different playback systems, especially those consumer-grade systems that don't have a particularly pronounced low or high end. I actually have another video discussing a neat trick for focusing our efforts on the mid-range for better mix translatability. I will leave a link to that video in the description box down below. When monitoring at higher levels, our natural hearing frequency response will flatten out even more, and we can really get a sense of how our mix will translate to larger systems. Music is often listened to very loud, say in the car or in the club, and getting a solid sense of how our mix will translate to these environments is a great idea. The only thing to take into account here, of course, is our hearing safety and not to monitor at these high levels for too long. You can invest in a proper SPL meter to get a better sense of the sound pressure level in your monitoring position, or download an app to do the same job. There are plenty of options on the market. Sound Meter by ExaMobile is the one I use on my iPhone, although they also have an app for Android. It's a free plugin with a premium version if you so choose. So now that you know how our hearing naturally changes at different sound pressure levels, you can extend this information into the mix and monitor at a variety of different levels to get a better sense of the holistic mix and mix translatability. In addition to the article referenced in this video, I will leave a whole bunch of other resources down in the description box down below. If you found this video informative, I would encourage you to hit that like button, and on the end screen here, I will put up another few videos on mixing here on the My New Microphone YouTube channel. So click on one of these up here, and I'll see you in the next one.